Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of SteamTime Sports. My name is Chris Stone. I'm the community lead, joined by our technology editor, Steve McCaskill. So, Steve, there's a little bit of discourse that's taking place on social media. Happens every year when there's a quote-unquote heat wave in the UK, where Americans like to laugh at Brits who are struggling in 80-degree heat Fahrenheit. I reckon that's probably mid to high 20s in Celsius for the non-Fahrenheit users. But today it's about 93 degrees Fahrenheit, about 32, 33 degrees on the Celsius scale. And I will say, Steve, as someone that has lived on both sides of the pond, it is unfair for Americans to judge Brits and their inability to handle heat, because it's just a little bit different over here compared to back at home.
I mean, you used Fahrenheit there and you just lost me immediately. Just, you know, have a chat with my dad. He'll be able to respond to the specifics of the temperatures you just gave. But yeah, the heat does hit differently here. The houses are built to retain heat, not expel it. And yeah, I'm certainly feeling it. And of course, we don't live in a country blessed with ubiquitous air conditioning, which is the other thing. But I do have to say, I was in Paris last week, and the heat in Paris also hits differently, especially when you're trying to go from one location to another across the city. So yeah, I think it could be a Northern Europe thing. I think what we need more air conditioning and whitewashed roofs. That's what we need.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things I try to tell people. It's like being from Ohio and I hear that there's an inch of snow in Georgia and like the whole city of Atlanta shuts down. I'm like, you guys are so soft, because in Ohio we need like 4 or 5 inches before we look to cancel anything. So I feel like sometimes before you start judging other people, you need to take a look inward, Steve, to have some self-reflection before you decide what people can and can't handle. Because the South of America, like I said, they can't handle an inch of snow, whereas, in Ohio, we're not even putting it in four-wheel drive yet at that point. So until you've been in London, and as you say, Steve, like my wife and I live in a south-facing new build flat, so triple glazed windows, and as you say, all the heat stays in, which is great during the winter because we never have to turn on the heating, so save some money there. But boy, it's roasty toasty in here, and I'm glad my wife bought an air conditioning unit. But I'm not in the cold air conditioned room for this podcast, Steve, because the fire that we're going to be producing with this content, I don't want it to affect the air conditioning.
Oh, I mean, of course, we are going to bring the heat, but I have to say, you are well and truly anglicized now that you've just chose to open this pod with the weather, and I'm so proud of you.
Well, I don't know if I mentioned it in the podcast, Steve, but during the Euros, where, we won't talk about it too much to upset the English folk, I actually said the word "we" in the middle of the semifinals, referring to England, and I felt so disgusted with myself.
Oh man, that's low. But we can always talk about the Euros. It was a good tournament for us. We're not salty about it. I think we all kind of knew what was happening there, and obviously we had such a great tournament that you got caught up in the bandwagon.
I was just excited. I was really looking forward to that potential extra bank holiday. And I know Americans are already jealous at the amount of holiday time that we get over here, but I could have definitely gone for one more bank holiday, Steve. I'm always down for a day off.
Move to France, you get loads.
Trust me, every time I try to message one of our, colleagues in, France, Italy, Spain in the month of August, I'm like, why did I do that? I know it's going to hurt. Why did I do that?
It's a lot of our offers to receive, eh?
Just a few. But Steve, talking about Paris, you mentioned you were out there. We just talked about the Olympics last week. We don't need to go too much into it from a business stream time perspective, but just how was your experience out in the Olympics from being there on the ground?
I absolutely loved it. I think it was a really good games from a sporting point of view. It was just a really good, I guess, aesthetic. It was the atmosphere, the vibe of the place was brilliant. And it's an Olympics that didn't have an Olympic park, so there wasn't really that focal point, but that meant that the city became the focal point. And, you'd walk around, there'd be people wearing, there'd be coaches, there'd be some athletes, there'd be bands milling around, sitting outside the bars and cafes, watching the various events. And it was just a really good time. And I don't think we're going to have an Olympics again where the city is the star like that. I think the way they married the sport and the host was probably unmatched in recent memory. I'm trying to think of an example. Maybe, in Barcelona 92 when the diving took place with the backdrop of the city and on the top of the hilltop. But, and I certainly think in my life it's up there with Sydney. And, for me, for many reasons, and not just because I live in London. London for me is still the high point, but I don't think we're going to get a games quite like Paris again. And of course, in 4 years' time, we're going to get something very, very different in LA.
Yeah, Tubbsy, our beloved global head of programming here at Sports Pro, the first thing he messaged me this morning on Monday at about 8:27 a.m. before we officially start, Red Hot Chili Peppers were so good. LA's going to be great. And I was like, yeah, LA's going to be a totally, I think, different experience. I said it'll be the most disgustingly over-the-top American event ever, and that includes the Super Bowls.
It's going to be, I thought you were about to say it's been the most overtop Olympics since Atlanta 96. But the thing for me, and one thing I'm slightly more enthusiastic about, is their commitment to car-free transportation, because I've been to LA and I would not want to be there without private transportation in terms of getting around, but then you get traffic jams. So it's so sprawling, you really need that. So they've gone up my estimation, and I'm a bit more optimistic about the fan experience than it was a couple of weeks ago now.
Well, I hope what they do is they kind of replicate what the Super Bowl did in LA and just get Dr. Dre and everybody else out there, Snoop Dogg. 'Cause obviously, Snoop Dogg had a great time out in Paris. It would be wrong to not have Snoop being a part of LA. So I'd love to see some big opening ceremony, which is a bunch of West Coast hip hop.
I think I'm going to call it now. I think it's going to be probably the best opening ceremony ever for a music fan. I think again, I still think London 2012 is the winner. I still think that's not been surpassed, even though I enjoyed the novelty of the river-based opening ceremony in Paris. But I think from a musical point of view, and maybe even production value, it's going to be unprecedented.
Good. I can't wait. 4 years, Steve. I said I didn't watch many Olympics, but maybe that'll do it for me. But Steve, we will get into the business of sports media and sports streaming. And we say here at Sports Pro, the content never sleeps. Well, the sports world never sleeps either. And while not the Premier League wrapping up, the Olympics just wrapping up later this week in just a few days' time. Your Manchester United, I believe, are the ones kicking off the Premier League season on Friday. So we are very close to the start of a new Premier League season, and one of the Premier League's biggest broadcaster, and you could say probably longest partner, as far as I'm aware, Steve, is Sky Sports. And although it's not necessarily directly related to that relationship with the Premier League, Sky Sports has also officially launched their Sky Sports Plus app, which does kick off with the start of the EFL season, the championship. So, Steve, could you just break down a little bit what actually is Sky Sports Plus?
Yeah, so it's not a standalone streaming service. It's what we'd call the media industry, value added extra, I suppose, and it's effectively a new hub for all of the additional content that Sky has acquired through its various rights deals. So that the most high profile property for that is the English Football League, the EFL. So this year it's the first year of a new, I think it's 935 million 5-year contract with the EFL that includes 1,000 matches every season. Now, to cover those matches, that you can't do that with just a few linear channels. And just to go into a bit more detail, that includes selected matches every weekend. It includes every match in the EFL that doesn't take place at 3 p.m. on a Saturday for reasons I think we've spoke about quite a lot. The blackout. It includes every game from the League Cup. So Premier League teams are covered by the deal to that extent. And they need a place for fans to discover this content, to distribute it. Sky does have streaming options already. It does have interactive TV options, but to date, it's been quite fragmented. It's not been a good user experience from my point of view. And I don't think it's always been easily identifiable where the content is. Once you get into there, something is better than nothing, right? But some of these games haven't had the same production values in the past. So Sky Sports Plus, it's a new home for all of this. You can get it by pushing your red button on your TV. You can get it on the Sky Sports app. It has all of the EFL games covered by this deal, all the League Cup games. It also has every game from the Rugby League Super League in the UK. It has every single game from the ATP and WTA tennis tours, which is another one of its new high volume deals that it's agreed. It's got the added coverage from the PGA Tour, from Formula One. So it's all about bringing this all together for discoverability. It's also a new thing that Sky can attract subscribers with. They can say, look, you subscribe to Sky, you get Sky Sports Plus, you get all this sport. I think they're billing it as 50% more sport than last season when you take everything into account. Every EFL team is going to be shown at least 20 times, which is not insignificant. That's that's a deal that makes sense to fans of these clubs. It's across all of Sky's platforms or its digital platforms. And so, yeah, it's just another service for Sky to provide the fans. It's a way for it to differentiate itself as a entertainment entity, and helps justify those subscription fees, which they're not insignificant. It's quite a lot of money per month. So if you're not going to watch it, mentally you might think, well, I'll get all this if I subscribe.
So one of the things Nick's talked about is Sky's goal, at least here in the UK, is to be the master aggregator of things, that you should always go through Sky to get to whatever piece of content it is. It's going to sync up your Netflix account, your Amazon Prime account, potentially even your TNT Sport account, but they want you to go via Sky to be able to get to that point. Does this just continue to play in that strategy of just being this ultimate aggregator, that you're always existing within the Sky platform?
I think it cements Sky's position as the market leader in sports broadcasting. I think TNT does a very good job. I think TNT has a really good portfolio, but the most important property in the UK is football, it's soccer, and to have the top 4 tiers in there is a big selling point. So to go to that aggregation point, yes, it also definitely plays into that. Sky, it still likes owning the content, but it no longer sees that as the most important thing. It's happy to work with third parties. It wants your Sky Q, your Sky Stream, or your Sky Glass to be the center of your entertainment at home. Now, what this does is it both shows off the power of Sky's platform to be the aggregator, and it also gives it, I guess, a little bit of extra exclusive content in there as well. So in a bid to fend off other aggregators, I know you can get, if you have an Apple TV, you can still get Sky Sports Plus through the Sky Sports app, etc., etc. But this ability to market Sky Sports Plus as a key selling point of aggregation, as a key point of its platform, I think is going to be really useful.
Last question I'll ask on this, and it's more talking about the English football pyramid, which, the UK holds in such high regard, Steve. One of the arguments for the 3 p.m. blackout rule was to protect lower level teams, protect attendance levels. And I know it's only been one weekend, but I've already seen Twitter accounts talking about how empty stadiums feel, and they've instantly blamed it on the expansion of Sky coverage of the EFL. Do you think, is it just, hey, it's first week of the season, Olympics are on, August is a really popular holiday month, or do you think this is actually something that does potentially impact it? Because we do talk about the football pyramid and how, I guess you could say, important it is to British society or those that watch sports. Do you think there's any impact at all with having an expanded amount of games on TV?
I mean, I'll start this by saying that I think the English football pyramid is the best thing about English football. It goes much deeper beyond the 4 professional leagues. It goes even further. It goes down to 7 or 8 tiers. Games are well attended. Comparatively speaking to other countries. I think one weekend is too small a sample size to come to any conclusions. As you're right, people are still in their holidays. There's a lot of other things vying for people's attention. It will be interesting to see what kind of impact there is. Now, it's only this first weekend that 3 p.m. blackout was lifted. So the 3 p.m. blackout will come back into place for the subsequent weeks. Weirdly, and again, this is not backed up by much data analytics, it feels almost that having live EFL games at 3 p.m. might be a bigger threat to the EFL attendances than the Premier League. But then I guess you could argue that people aren't bothered because they go to EFL because they want to watch a game. I mean, you could argue that the Premier League at 3 p.m. could stop people going to see a local team, potentially. I think the best sample of data that they have is when EFL games go up against Champions League games on TV on Tuesday and Wednesday nights, and there is an impact on attendance then, but I think it's not as big as you might think. So, I mean, me personally, I would never want the full pyramid to be compromised in any way. I think it's too important, and I think it does have a knock-on effect on the global appeal of the Premier League because, the Premier League is very well marketed, but I think part of it is that England is this home of football. Everyone loves football. Look how big the attendances are in the Championship, for example, and so I think it's in everyone's interest to protect it. But at the same time, I don't know how long the blackout is sustainable in the modern era, and it's almost like a gateway to piracy because people discover they can pirate 3 p.m. games. They'll discover they can pirate 5 p.m. games and everything else. So I think it's something that should be continuously looked at. I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't a factor in the next Premier League domestic rights deal. And again, Sky Sports Plus almost feels like a way for the Sky to say to the Premier League that we can do everything if you give it to us. And the Premier League might think, well, we might not be able to increase our revenue without increasing inventory. So lots of moving parts. I'm not sure if I've answered the question. I think it's complicated. I don't think we have enough data, but I don't think the central issue with the football pyramid has gone away.
Yeah, I think it's that whole causation correlation, because to me, just saying it's because the games are now on TV is too simple. We know piracy exists. We know there's ways for people to watch content. I think there's further things like how much more expensive is it these days to get tickets? As a West Ham fan, I saw that they've recently removed family price seating. So now all of a sudden families are going to have to pay almost triple what they paid last year. That probably has a bigger impact on attendance of games than necessarily the availability on broadcast, at least in my personal opinion. There's multiple layers to it.
Yeah, I mean, this season, this is also, Premiership Rugby in England has it the first time ever. Every single game is going to be available on TNT Sports. Now, I have a season ticket to Harlequins. It being on TV is not going to stop me going. Similarly, I live near, AFC Wimbledon. If I want to go to a game, I will go to the game. I'm not going to watch it on TV. It's not, I'm not going to sit at 3:00 on a Saturday and watch AFC Wimbledon on TV. I'm going to go to the ground. So, yeah, I think it's a complicated issue. I think both. I sit very in the middle on that one, but that's just my personal view.
That's fine. We will come back to lower league football in a little bit, but we're going to jump to a story that has possibly a few more zeros attached to it. Now, one of the news stories that we have been following is the outcome of the latest NBA rights deal, and we sort of talked about what that would mean for certain companies, those that were successful in their bid and those that were unsuccessful in their bid. Warner Brothers Discovery, the long-term partner for the NBA, right now at the moment, as it currently stands, legal situation impending. Their latest sort of stock report came out, and I'll admit I'm not always as good at these numbers and what they mean as opposed to what Nick is, but it's reported that they've got nearly a $10 billion loss for Q2 in 2024, and a lot of this is kind of being down to a couple different things. It's not exclusively just the NBA, but it is certainly heavily linked to that. So is this certainly just what we should have expected, Steve, when Warner Brothers or Turner Sports, if we want to look at TNT specifically, this was always going to be an outcome of losing those rights?
Yeah, I think at this point, I don't know if it is a perfect quote or if it's a paraphrasing, but David Zaslav saying we don't need the NBA. Well, we're sure about to find out. And I think if you see sport as the glue holding the bundle together, and I guess the bedrock of your bundle economics being the amount that you can charge cable providers to host your channels, and also your advertising business. If you take away a key part of that in the NBA, you're gonna what are you left with? It's going to be a very tricky sell. So losing the NBA isn't the cause of all this, but it's certainly a big factor, and it just reflects the declining influence of cable television, which has always brought in a lot of money, and and the difficulties in adapting to a streaming world. So if you are WBD, you have this suite of cable channels that, again, you're probably funded through advertising and through carriage fees. And if people aren't watching those, you need to have a pretty decent stream proposition. But of course, streaming is a very competitive landscape. There's subscription fatigue. There's a high cost of acquiring customers. It's lower margins. You're caught between a rock and a hard place, and it's one of the reasons why someone like Netflix has been able to navigate this so successfully, because it's had no legacy business to defend. It's been able to be pretty thrifty when it's come to sports rights and things like that. So I think what's happening at WD is just reflecting the ongoing shift in the marketplace. I mean, just look, one of its strategy is reposition True TV as effectively a sports network to fill it in a bid to get more carriage fees. So sport is obviously very, very important to it, but it's something that everyone's facing. I mean, look at Paramount Global. That's a profitable business, but its current owners are thinking, do they have the appetite to compete in the streaming world? Do they want to hand it over to someone else who thinks that they can make a better go of it? I mean, WBD has got a lot of things going for it. From its entertainment portfolio, it's got studios, it's got CNN, it's got other cable properties. So it's able to create a pretty decent streaming proposition. It's whether there's space for it in the market and whether consumers are willing to pay for it alongside everything else they pay for, like they would have done automatically with a bundle.
Well, I know Nick always talks about those premium rights, which, if we're talking about the NBA within the US, certainly ticks the box as one of those premium rights. They're usually a loss leader. You're usually not going to make back the money on the investment because it's so massive. But as you say, it's the piece that pulls everything else together within that deal. And it's almost a question is the loss of not having the NBA going to be worse than the loss they might have taken by just buying the rights, but keeping some of those subscribers or keeping stock shareholders happy?
Yeah, I think sometimes you do have a choice, and both the choices might not be great. And it does seem as though perhaps WBD should have bitten the bullet and just overpaid for the NBA to protect the rest of its business, giving it a bit of breathing room to figure out how to manage this shift to streaming. It's never going to make the money back, but it's going to allow the rest of its portfolio to remain profitable. So, yeah, it's something everyone's struggling with. They're probably right in that the rights aren't worth what others are paying, but others see it as part of, I guess, a bigger picture.
Well, another one of the big streaming giants is, like I said, there's seemingly a few different reports coming out that we're getting more information. Disney actually managed to have its first operating profit, apparently of $47 million in Q3 of 2024, which marks a significant turnaround from a $512 million loss in the same period last year. So it looks like there's an increase of 15% on year to year, and they're showing a 4% growth, despite, as you say, being a very challenging market. Now, again, Disney, like Warner Brothers Discovery, is not solely dependent upon ESPN, which is kind of, I guess, the main part of this streaming package. But it does show that there are some people that have managed to find success in this space at this time, Steve.
Yeah, but they've spent a lot of money getting to that point. I think that's I guess you're hoping the long term that the profits from streaming will offset everything you've spent on content, customer acquisition, etc. Yeah, as you say, Disney it's a huge company. It makes a lot of money from theme parks. It's got film studios. There's a lot of moving parts there. The thing about Disney is it's got, it's also one of these legacy players that's got to, I guess, in effect, manage the decline of its cable business while also building up its streaming business at the same time and hoping the two don't cannibalize. That's, that it needs to get to a point where it has enough streaming subscribers at a certain price point that it becomes just as profitable as cable. And that's its big challenge. Disney's got a lot of things going for it. ESPN, it's not going to have a captive market anymore with cable, but it's still going to have quite a big brand draw. It's Disney is always going to have its fans, but the thing about what Disney wants to do is it's trying to make sure it's on as many places as possible as cable. Let's say if cable's relatively ubiquitous, it's in everyone's homes. Disney wants to make sure it has that same level of reach, whether it's through partnerships, whether that's through other streaming services, whether it's through telcos, whether it's through mobile networks, whether it's through tech giants. There's a lot of talk about a partnership with Apple, for example, is something that's often been touted. So it's really making sure it's giving itself the best chance as possible before it launches the DC version of ESPN in 2025, because that's going to be a pivotal moment in this marketplace. I guess you can say that Disney is both a slave to its fate, but also it's the one that decides it. It decides when to pull that switch on cable. But then cable will probably always be a certain business. Like it will certainly be a certain size business. I don't see it going away actually for a good while yet. It was never reached the heights it did 10 years ago. So yeah, good for them. They're making profit in the streaming division. It's taken a lot to get to this point. Revenue is up. ESPN's doing well. It's all about a case how they manage that shift and how the D2C version of ESPN takes off. And of course, there's venue as well.
Well, I'm going to tie that in nicely because the third company we were going to talk about is Fubo. we've had David Gandler on multiple times, so I'm sure he'll be very happy and pleased to say that Fubo, for I believe the sixth straight quarter, has now posted revenue growth, which, for a company that is trying to fight some of the big, more established players, it's very positive news for them. At the same time, Steve, as you say, they've also got their ongoing legal battle regarding the venue joint venture, which is taking place between Disney and Warner Brothers Discovery, who we just talked about, as well as Fox. And it's interesting, Steve, because it's one of those things where we've talked about cord cutting, but venue almost kind of seems like a new version of the bundle that we were all paying for to begin with.
Yeah, it's almost like the bundle was a pretty good deal for sports fans, I think, is what people are coming around to. I mean, yeah, Fubo is looking to capitalize on cord cutting by, you don't need to be tied to a certain provider. It provides competition. I mean, this, Chris, in a lot of cities, you have a choice of one provider, basically. In some places, it's there's not a lot of options out there. So it's offering an alternative over the top of an internet network. It's challenging, I guess, some of the bigger players. It would like to be competitive in pricing, be a real disruptor. Unfortunately for Fubo, it can only really, I guess, offer the same bundle as cable providers. It has to take that same package of entertainment. It'll do what it can here and there. But if it wants to offer channels like ESPN and Fox, which don't have D2C versions at the minute, it needs to play by the rules, I suppose. But it would love to be able to cut out a lot of that and just offer a sports service to fans. But of course, that would upset a lot of people who still like getting those carriage fees. Now, that's kind of the basis of its dispute with Venue, because it's arguing that Venue's being able to do that, offer that sports light package that it's not allowed to. So that's kind of what its grief is. It would love to be able to strip it out, like I just said, and it's saying it's unfair that these companies behind Venue are doing that while denying others the opportunity, potentially, I guess, making it more difficult for an outsider like Fubo to compete.
Well, I love a good underdog story, so anything to disrupt the system, I'm certainly going to be a fan of. And I think America in general is just a bit more interesting than some of the markets we talk about in Europe. Sky's never had a real true competitor. I know BT Sport did a little bit, TNT Sport, and is now taking up that mantle. Amazon's got a package specifically built into some of the Premier League stuff, but it does feel like there's a little bit more of this back and forth negotiating competition that you'd like to see, or at least I enjoy seeing, Steve, because it makes for good news.
The one thing I'd say in Europe, there's definitely more platform competition than there is in the US because of that historic, I guess, reliance on cable. If you have, if Comcast is the only player in your town, you're going to go with Comcast. Whereas in the UK, you have, Sky's had a pretty, historic advantage, but it's still got to compete with Virgin Media. It's got BT now. It's got, Talk for a while. And of course, now it's got these OTT players, and, you can get your TV that way. France has multiple IP TV providers. So you're right. Sky might be quite dominant in terms of content, but it hasn't had its own way when it comes to distribution.
Yes. So moving back into the world of football, Steve, I thought it was an interesting story, was that DAZN is now claimed all of the non-league football. So we talked about the football pyramid. There's the Premier League that everyone knows. There's the EFL Championship, League One, but I believe it goes down, 7-8 levels deep into the football pyramid. And DAZN have just signed a 7-year deal to broadcast the English National Football League, which is covering the fifth and sixth tiers. That was just a whirlwind to try to say there, Steve. A little bit of a tongue twister on a Monday, but covering the fifth and sixth tiers of English football from the 2024-2025 season through 2031, replacing TNT. So this means they're going to get all kinds of different matches. I think something close to it says they're going to stream all 557 fifth tier matches, so that's quite a bunch, and then selected games from the sixth tier will be available. There'll still be some rules around the 3 p.m. blackout that they'll have to manage, but Steve, maybe explain it to someone that isn't from the UK why something that seems so low down is actually quite meaningful, and then particularly meaningful for someone like DAZN as a streaming platform.
I quite enjoyed you trying to grapple with that, Chris. I'm not going to lie. It's like me when I'm trying to figure out Division 1, 2, and 3 of NCAA athletics. Yeah. So it can't be all the non-league football because that would be completely ridiculous given how many tiers there are. But as you say, it's the fifth and sixth tiers. So that's the National League Premier, which is the fifth tier, which is it's semi-professional, but there are quite a few professional teams in it. And then you've got the sixth tier, which is National League North and National League South. These rights have had a weird history. And I think part of the reason why Sky sort of showed, I guess, a couple of matches here and there on an ad hoc basis in the 90s, and that might have been towards the business end of the season, or if a big team had dropped out of the EFL and were in the National League. It then got a formal TV deal, and then I guess the most recent one were with TNT Sports, which, if Sky has the Premier League and has the EFL all sewn up, and football is the most important thing in your market, I think it's just good to have football on the books, basically. And we got to this weird situation when National League North teams were getting more exposure on TV than League Two, because which is the fourth tier, because they're tied up as part of this wider AFL deal. Not anymore, of course, because we've talked about Sky Sports Plus. So that's kind of, I guess, how it's been able to get this profile in the UK. It's not been for a lot of money per se. TNT, as I guess, it's shown one match a week on Saturdays to complement its European and Premier League coverage. It's also used as kind of a technical showcase for some of its, things like 5G broadcasting. So that's a way to it's used the rights. So it's not among the most important rights, really. I guess people might watch the playoff final or something like that. For DAZN to take it on, I guess the logic is twofold. One is it does increase the profile of DAZN in the UK, weirdly, even if it's not, people aren't necessarily going to subscribe to watch National League. People are going to know that it's acquiring rights in the UK. It's buying something that's very seemingly on the face of it quite UK specific. I guess, again, same reasons. If a big team drops down, it's going to have a greater profile. We probably won't see a repeat of something like Wrexham again. But, Wrexham were a big club, but of course they got taken to new levels by their ownership. The international deal for me is much more interesting. Now, on the face of it, you could say it's an opportunity for fans, for National League clubs to reach a global audience. It's a way for expat fans to watch their team in a way they've never been able to do. I think a large part of it might be tied into betting and DAZN Bet and maybe integrating it that way. I think it's a lot of content to add to that platform. That's a lot of games every weekend from 3 divisions to show. So if you're able to get in-play betting on that, that's a way to make it work. Certainly, from my point of view, the international side of the deal was emphasized a lot more than the local one. So, that's perhaps playing on my mind there. So, yeah, I think that's probably why it's happening. It's just a high volume sport. There's a few boxes this platform that this ticks, and for the National League, maybe it's better to have this exposure on a platform like DAZN than it is to be a relative afterthought on TNT.
Yeah, there's a couple interesting sides of that. I remember speaking to Melissa Lawton at SailGP, and she was talking about negotiating broadcast deals, and she said for them, it was just important to figure out who they were before or who they were after in the TV about discoverability than it was necessarily about the deal itself. And, on the flip side, the platforms need to always have content on. They need to make sure people are always coming back. And sometimes the decision isn't always about who pays the most money, but from a discoverability perspective, are we going to be placed next to other attractive rights holders that, maybe we aren't the reason people are coming on, but if we happen to be on just before a major event or we're on just after a major event, now all of a sudden it's more likely we're going to be discovered, which is more valuable sometimes in a monetary amount of money, depending on what that is.
Yeah, I mean, National League is going to get a profile alongside Premier League in some markets. It's going to be alongside the EFL in some markets. Internationally, if people are going for the women's football that DAZN has on an international basis, they're going to be seen alongside that. It's also worth pointing out that I think some of the content is an add-on to DAZN, so there is that element to it. A bit like how Game Pass operates, on a global basis. So, when your TV deal was so relatively so small, you can afford to take. I get not if it's not a risk, you'd afford to take an experimental approach to how you have your media rights.
Yeah. Last story we're going to talk about, we're going to stay in the football world, Steve. And it's interesting to me because we've seen it happen a little bit more now, and there's just a debate whether or not it's actually smart investment, whether or not it can actually work. But teams continue to do it nonetheless. And the newest one is Newcastle United has introduced a new direct-to-consumer streaming service. It's powered by Endeavor Streaming, so obviously very good background in terms of if you're going to go with someone to build a platform, very good job there. But this is going to include some of the things that we've seen on some other platforms recently that have launched for football clubs as a way to directly connect with fans in terms of content. There will be some select live content that includes some of the women's team, the under 21s, the under 18s. There'll be some on-demand footage. There'll also be some original content. Steve, the question I guess it's always been asked is, does that content that we just talked about there provide enough value for someone to actually subscribe to?
I mean, a simplistic answer is yes. MUTV have been doing this with a linear channel since 1998, at least in the UK. I think a little bit longer in elsewhere. It's been available certainly in Scandinavia on local platforms there in a linear world. So that's still running. It's now an OTT service in itself. So you can't imagine that Manchester United have been doing it for 26 plus years without it having some sort of benefit. I think in the modern era of fandom, where you do want to create these direct relationships with your fans, it almost makes sense to do it even if there's not a direct financial benefit, because of the ability to build a relationship with fans, get that data. I think that's really a really important part of this piece. Ability to cross-sell, things like merchandise, ticketing, speak to them whether on platform, off platform. I think if you're a top club worth its salt, you kind of need to have a strategy on this. We've seen Tottenham do it with Spurs play, Real Madrid have this, Barcelona, of course, and I think Liverpool have an in-house TV station as well. It's just if you can't be reliant on third-party platforms, and if the content they have, okay, it might not be necessarily the most attractive content. Hey, it might be to super fans. I see people, I don't really use Twitter too much these days, or X rather, and I stay away from United Twitter like the plague because there's some really awful takes on that. But people end up watching under 21 matches just to see the next stars who can come through, and they have some really strong opinions on who we should promote to the first team. I think there's also an appetite for athlete-focused content. So if you can get interviews with the players, you can do series like something like I guess Crossbar Challenge. People might want to watch that. They might be, if they're so into the club, they might be willing to go away from something like YouTube to your own platform to watch it. And then from that streaming platform, you can build out, I guess, a suite of other services. So lots of clubs have Web3 strategies. If you can build out a pretty technical platform, like I'm sure Newcastle are able to do with Endeavor, which is one of the leading players in this space, I'm sure that's creating more service on top is the goal. Whether it becomes a viable subscription business, I'm not sure. I guess it really depends on the club. I'm not privy to a lot of that information, but I just think in an era where fans want more about the clubs and athletes they love than ever before, there could well be a market for it. It's probably not, these things aren't aimed for me, although my dad has been a subscriber to MUTV since 1998, so maybe he was ahead of the game. But it just feels like it's just a really important data opportunity, really important digital opportunity, and I guess it's almost a status thing as well, isn't it? Like we have our in-house operation, and a club like Newcastle with increasingly global ambitions, it wants to, Real did have one. Why should Newcastle United?
Well, my takeaway from that is your father is a glutton for punishment. But, Steve, could this potentially be something, and maybe it already exists and I'm just not aware of it, does this become a part of a broader membership program? I think about what I see in America, where if you're a season ticket holder, because of some of the RSN deals that are in place, you're a season ticket holder, and then you also get a membership or a subscription to the local RSN. So that way you can watch all the away games that you're not there, or home game that you maybe can't travel to. Does this streaming platform perhaps become a way to reward members, maybe perhaps instead of just an add-on that they pay for, something that's more about a rewarding experience for being, a super fan, being a member of the club?
I think it might be challenging at a Premier League or top flight level to make that happen. I think the economics of top flight football are very different to baseball in the US. I mean, the only thing I can think of that's comparable is, again, I have a Harlequin season ticket holder, which is the second time I mentioned on this podcast, but there is a good reason for it. And with the games being on, every game has been broadcast on PRTV, which is Premier Rugby's in-house OTT service. That's all now shifting to TNT Sports from next season. During the pandemic, as a season ticket holder, I was given access to get to live games and to get away games. So there's scope for something like that to work. Maybe it could work for something like an EFL team that can now show more matches, whether there was an opportunity to do a match pass or something like that, which I don't think is possible with Sky, although I guess they could give away a day pass to Now TV. Yeah, I don't know if the economics work in quite the same way as they do in the US or other sports, just because of the nature of that Premier League TV deal or the Liga TV deal, etc.
Fair. Well, I'll be honest, maybe I'm just not a big enough West Ham fan to pay for the subscription. I'm happy for whatever content they provided me on social media or YouTube. I mean, I should be, given how successful we're going to be this season, Steve, but I'm not sure. I'm trying to think. I pay for my NFL Game Pass, Steve, so I can watch my Bengals. I guess that's the question, Steve. Would I pay for a subscription to exclusive Bengals content, Steve?
I'm sure that the NFL would love to tap your brain right now and find that out. Although, given other legal issues that the NFL has had recently with Sunday Ticket, remember, they don't want to offer you a single Game Pass at all. They want you to keep on subscribing for everything.
Yeah, maybe not. It's a good question. I'll have to think about it. I'll come back with an answer on the next podcast. But thank you, everybody, for joining in this week. Steve, thank you for filling in for Nick. And if you haven't seen, Steve is going to be much more involved with the StreamTime podcast. The OTT newsletter is turning into the StreamTime newsletter. Maybe, Steve, before we hop off, you could maybe just give a quick shout out to what that's going to be all about.
Yeah, so if you subscribe to the Sports Pro OTT and broadcast newsletter, nothing changes. It still comes into your inbox every fortnight on a Thursday. But StreamTime Sports, the newsletter, it's going to be a bit, still going to have the same insight and news as the previous newsletter, just with a bit more, input from the podcast, a bit more, I guess, what it's kind of what we're reading around the web. It's going to have a bit more business intelligence from our media hub on Sports Pro Plus. So, if you're listening to this, I assume you're either passionate or work in the sports broadcasting industry. So it's going to be your essential fortnightly bulletin to everything that's going on. And yeah, you can expect to hear more of me on the pod. The first StreamTime Sports newsletter was my broadcasting takeaways from Paris. Some of the bits that I found out while I was down on the ground in last week. So yeah, if you haven't subscribed already, please do.
Awesome. And thank you, everybody. And we'll catch you for the next episode.
Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as Sports Pro Nick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Streamtimers. Until next time.